let's just imagine that we're on a scene and we see, we're going to ask ourselves, what are the top three things that this individual needs? So let's say we respond somewhere and it's an older lady. She's alone and she's just sitting there on the sofa crying. The police bring you in, say, here's the survivor. The husband had completed suicide uh, in the kitchen with a death by gunshot, and and now you're ministering to this person. What do you think that person might say or communicate? What are their needs? What are maybe the top three things that they are needing in that moment or experiencing and feeling in that moment? Just some examples.
Um,
Go ahead, Angela.
yeah, well, given the intensity of the crisis, they're needing to just maybe just have someone to just be with them and
Mm-hmm.
not even talk to them at this point because they're in shock.
Yeah. So presence would be one of them, just having someone
Mhm.
with them. So there's one. What else? What might be a second one? Second
They
thing.
feel their pain is witnessed.
Mhm.
Uh-huh.
And
They're
then
witness, they're seen. Yeah.
unconditional love.
Uh-huh. Unconditional love. Yeah. So now when we think of those things that they need, those are really deep soul needs. The person they need presence. I think of, in a scriptural sense, from a Christian faith tradition, I need to know that I'm not alone. I'll never be forgotten or forsaken or left alone, right?
And
Um,
non-judgmental.
and non-judgmental, like unconditional love, right? We always think of that as an attribute of God, this love that is just transcending all things, um, and the ability to be seen, right? Don't we see God is everywhere? God sees everything. God knows everything, right? These are deep spiritual needs. Uh, they're deep characteristics of God, of who God is. At the end of the day, whether we're believers or not, we all need the attributes of God. We need presence. We need unconditional love. We need to be seen and know that we matter and we have sacred worth, right? So when we can recognize some of these things that are at the deepest place of someone's need, we recognize also those soul needs often are um, are the name of an attribute of God, right? So when we think of it in the sense of spiritual naming, if you're praying with someone or ministering to them or having spiritual discussion with them, if it's invited, those are often the words that we can use, right? We can name the attributes of God, the characteristics of God that they so deeply desire as the names of God sometimes within our prayer. So, for example, here's a very long list of names of God, right? Um, you can find these online, just Google names of God, and you can find all kinds of different versions, right? And a lot of these are abiding one, advocate, all compassionate, maker of the heavens. These are very general. But imagine if you're someone who's in that situation and you sit down with that maybe that spouse says, Chaplain, would you pray with me? And you've been there and you've been talking and listening and you see them and you hear them. And then you begin your prayer. And maybe your prayer is something along the lines of, to our God who is always present with us, who even in the midst of this dark moment is a light and a presence, who will never leave us or forsake us, who is always with us. Um, we thank you for seeing us in this moment. We thank you for seeing the pain. We thank you for seeing what we need. We thank you for seeing tomorrow and that we can trust you with tomorrow. We thank you, God, that in the midst of the confusion of what we're experiencing and what we're struggling through, that you have an unconditional love that understands all things and knows all things and heals all things. And we want you to be with us. Amen. Right? So now you've prayed. You're not using any specific religious language. You're literally just naming their soul needs, which again are our deepest soul needs are the attributes of God. God created us to be in this intimate relationship, right? So often when we're saying prayers, we can pray in a way that is naming God, but is very specific to what they're going through. And I'll just go back to that, because if we're naming the exact things that they so deeply need and that they've been praying and crying out for me, I call that a miracle. I call that a God moment. I say God showed up. I can think of times in my life when I really needed a very specific prayer and someone offered that prayer having no clue of what I was going through. And in my mind, I thought God just showed up through that person, right? No amount of preaching from that person would have told me that God was present. But when they touched my soul need in the deepest place and didn't let any barriers get in the way, and they got all the way down in there and then spoke to that part of my soul and named God in the midst of that, that for me was a miracle. That I felt God reach down into my soul and touch me in that place that no one else could get to, right? So at the end of the day, if our goal is to touch people with the love of God in the deepest place, then we have to find ways that are authentic to us to communicate our faith, right? So how can I pray? Be authentic, be spiritual, and be inclusive, right? You have to pray in a way that's authentic to you. You can't pray in a way that's not authentic. Have you ever had someone say, "Oh yeah, yeah, yeah," and they're whatever they're saying, and they're forcing the smile, and it's like, you know, it's you're in church and they say, "Turn to your neighbor and say, 'Neighbor, I love you,' and you look over and it's that person who's been trying to nail you to the cross in church council meeting for the past 3 years. They know that, right? It's not authentic. Um, you want to be authentic to your faith, and that's often our greatest challenge, right? Pray in a way that's deeply spiritual. Can you pray in a way that's invitational, inclusive, doesn't raise any barriers for people, but is deeply spiritual and authentic to who you are? And can you do it in a way that's inclusive of anyone? And if you do, then that's where we have that experience where those barriers start to disappear and we seem to get down into the deepest of places. A perfect example is you're on a ride along with a police officer. You could start the conversation this way. What neighborhood do you live in? What are your hobbies? Oh, hunting. Oh, great. What do you shoot? Let's talk guns. Well, what's your rank? Right? The world always wants to talk about like possessions, position, power, performance. It wants to get into all those things. But when you're asking more the why of what they do. Oh, you like hunting? Why do you like hunting? Well, I like just getting away from everything, get away from the family or whatever, Why is that? Well, it just can become, I just have a tough time. The kids are always screaming. If I can get away, it just gives me some clarity of mind. I can go back and be my best self to them. Oh, wow. Now we're getting somewhere in the conversation. Well, never mind that. What kind of gun do you like to shoot? No, no, let's keep asking the why questions. And what else is important to you? And why is that important to you? Why is watching the sunrise and hearing the birds an incredible experience to you? What do you feel in that, right? You're going deeper and deeper into the whys and the hows and as opposed to the what and the things that people tend to have anxiety over, right? So a lot of times that's what we're really looking for in our language is how do we do that and how do we open people up? Or helping someone with a broken basic assumption about life or a core belief or value that's been frustrated or broken, right? We mentioned about humility. Just a few things. This just sort of like one of those catch-all slides that you just sort of dump things in there. But I think a lot of times chaplaincy puts you in these awkward, really tough situations where you don't know what's the right thing to say a lot of times. So just be humble. Like we said, be as humble as humidity. One prayer could be, can I be nothing? Can I be small enough that God might be anything through me, right? Don't go into your ministry or your situations thinking that you're completed or you have to be totally prepared. No, you just have to be consecrated. You just have to dedicate yourself and everything you're doing for God's use in whatever way it may be. Sometimes God will use you in a profound way, humiliating you at the same time. Sometimes you'll say the dumb thing that will help that person have a chuckle and maybe a sense of God's presence, right? Don't try and be perfect. You're not perfect. Just be purposed, right? We can say the wrong thing, but if people sense your purpose and your why and your heart, there's a lot of forgiveness in there. And God will do much more with our purpose than our desire to be perfect. Our desire to be perfect is ministering to our own reflection. We're trying to do what God does perfectly. It's about us doing, not what God's up to. God can use you without realizing it. And I look back at I think there's so many times that God used me and I didn't even know, or it was an embarrassing situation for me and painful, but God used that to help someone in the midst of that. Yeah, so that kind of humility really helps. And you don't have to feel any special spark of energy or spark of joy or whatever they call it, right? For God to do a miracle through you. God just showing up and thinking that you're doing nothing and feeling useless, God may use you more than you'll ever know. God doesn't do this to make you feel something. So it's just something to be aware of in your ministry, and chaplaincy is, at the end of the day, a being more than a doing. It's being faithful to who God's called you to be and showing up there as that and nothing else. And often that's what God will use. So many of us have had that experience where we've done nothing and God has shown up. What I want to do is just close with, we all know this prayer. I'll read this and I want to share a quick testimony as a closer, but Father Mychal Judge, who is our first death in 9/11 and a beloved FDNY chaplain, this is adapted from his prayer, but the sense that we're praying, Lord, help me to be who you created me to be. Take me where you want me to be. Let me meet who you want me to meet. Tell me what you want me to say and keep me out of your way. This sense that we can put ourselves on the side and help people in ways that are meaningful to them and meaningful to God, whether it fits within our, God doesn't really care about my theology. God cares about what God's will. And God's will is probably the most healthy theology. I want to close with this. I'm only here because this is a topic that's passionate to me, and I'm only here because someone used this. I was an atheist till I was 21, and my wife was Catholic, and I was a jazz musician, and jazz is very spiritual music. It's very soulful music, and I would be playing, and there were times when I was playing the drums where I felt like I wasn't the one playing, like something was playing through me, and I'd have these like transcending experiences, and I had no name for them except they seemed to be like the same feeling when I felt deep love. I don't know. I had this strange, it was like an energy, right? So I had all this sort of like new agey language around it. So we go to the priest to reserve the church for the wedding, and this young priest is there, and he says to my wife, "Tell me about your faith." She says, "Oh, I went to Catholic school, went through sacraments." And he says, "Oh, great, great, great." Turns to me, says, "Tell me about your faith." And I said, "Well, I'm a drummer and I feel this energy and I don't know what it is, but da 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 da." And he looks at me and he goes, "We'll have to work on you. Come back tomorrow at 10, whatever time he said, or next week, whatever." Man, I was so mad. I was just downright pissed. So I went home, I grabbed my wife's Bible, and this is what I mean by God can use our idiocy for his purposes. It got me so mad that it actually made me open the Bible. And I started reading it and writing down all the things I had problems with and where I thought God was nonsense and all this kind of stuff. And I went back to meet that priest and he wasn't there. There was another priest who was like in his 40s or late 30s. who said, "Hey, I'm Father Joe, and I just got out of seminary, ordained, and this is my first church. You'll be the first wedding I'm doing. And what are you here for?" The other priest moved to another church, and I said, "Oh, well, let me tell you." And I start going through my list. He told me later that he thought in his mind, it was like, "Whoa, Tiger," because I was so ferocious with all these things I had issues with. And he just sat back and listened. And at the end of like 45 minutes, he said, "Wow, that's cool." He said, I'm a musician too. I play guitar." And we started talking about music. And he said, "Hey, why don't you come back tomorrow?" I said, "Okay." So I'll come back the next day, bring donuts, coffee, smoking cigarettes in his office. Church leaders are lined up because, when you go to a new church, they all want to tell you their agendas real quick. So all these church leaders were all lined up to pump them full of their agendas. And he wasn't spending any time with them. He's sitting with me for 2 hours in a smoke-filled church office with me smoking and just rambling my rant against God. And at the end of the time, he said, "Wow." He said, that energy or that thing that you're thinking of or feeling. He said, "Try this. Just call it God for the next week and just see how that feels to you. If by labeling it you can sort of understand a little more." I was like, "Okay." So I tried it. I went back the next week. He listened again, another 2 hours of me smoking and ranting and talking. And he said, "Okay, so that thing that you call God," he said, "try just for a week calling it Jesus." And I said, "Okay." And then I came back the next week. He asked me how it went. He said, "Just out of curiosity, just put a chair across the room, an empty chair, and just imagine Jesus is in that chair and just try having a discussion with him." And I came back and I gave my life to Christ, and I was baptized that next Easter. Um, he didn't try and label how God was showing up in my life. I know now very well what the feeling of like you all, the feeling of and I'm speaking from a Christian perspective, the feeling of the Holy Spirit is. That was what I was feeling before I had any words for it. It was God was wooing me, as John Wesley would say. The presence of God was there and moving. I was experiencing an intimate connection with God before I had any words for it. And he allowed me to explore it. He didn't try and label it. It was like 2 weeks in before he said, "Why don't you try calling God?" Or some time frame like that. So I say this to say, find the way that you can help folks be spiritually hospitable, help them, invite God deep into their souls, without any barriers. And what does that look like for you? What does that look like for you in being authentic in your faith and your convictions?